My name is Penny Partridge, and the name of this workshop is Why Couldn't My Birth Mother Keep Me? And before I do some more introduction to that topic, I want you to stretch and make yourselves comfortable if you like, and take a deep breath, and then close your eyes and ask yourself how you feel at this moment about having been placed for adoption. If you haven't been placed for adoption, then think about what you imagine you would feel. Please come sit up here with us. Yeah. I've asked people to get relaxed and think for a few moments about how you feel about having been placed for adoption, or if you weren't placed for adoption, how you think you would feel. Okay. What I'd like to do is to go around and for you to give us one word if there was one feeling that was your answer to yourself. And if you had mixed feelings, give us 2 or 3 words to indicate the mix of feelings.
Dumped and sad.
Dumped and sad.
I'm not adopted, so this is my positive thought. Rejected.
Why?
Devastated.
Maybe I should repeat more consistently. Let's do it again, okay?
Dumped and sad.
Dumped and sad. Rejected.
Why?
Why? Rage. Devastated.
I also wasn't abandoned or
Abandoned.
Sorry.
Sorry. Alone. Abandoned. Worthless.
Confused.
Confused. Severed.
I'm a birth mom, and I think confused, but also as a birth mom, I am stunned by the degree of adopting feeling, and that's one of the reasons I'm here. When I think of the sacrifices that we made because we thought we were doing something good, and that's not how you all felt it.
Well, it's a good thing I'm the last person, because I feel okay at this moment about having been placed for adoption. But on another level, I feel alone.
Yeah, I think they're real mixed feelings. It's part of me sad that I never really got to know my birth mother, but I'm grateful because my adopted home is a good home. And I think things have been really difficult had she kept me. I would not have been an easy life.
And
I think I'm probably better off in the long run having been adopted.
have you had a chance to meet her?
I've talked to her on the phone. She's a beautiful person. She's very nice. But, and she kept me. She's in her 60s, so this was back in the 50s. And she kept me. She wouldn't have been able to keep her job. She was a teacher. So financially, there would have been no stability there. And she might have resented me all my life for having put this on her. I don't know. And I think life would be really rough on me had I stayed with her. But I am sad because I think she and I would have had a lot in common, but I do know enough. I don't know enough about her. I never will, but I'm sad about that. But I'm not angry.
Okay, let me just say a little bit more by way of introduction. When they first asked me to do this workshop, my first association to why didn't my birth mother keep me, or why couldn't my birth mother keep me,
Just make space for this woman. Can people make space for this woman? That's good.
Sorry, everybody.
there's plenty of room for you, Ruth.
These chairs anyway, huh?
Great, great. Could you people come up so you're not sitting behind us? Let me just backtrack slightly. This is about why couldn't my birth mother keep me? And when I was first asked to do this workshop, my first association to it was that this is a self-help workshop for people who feel rejected. That was my first thought. And my second thought was, this is not really one of my issues. And the person who asked me to do it said, well, then you'll probably be good at doing the workshop. And she said, and actually we're asking you because we trust you not to go on and on about your own story. So, then as I got into thinking about the question of why couldn't my birth mother keep me, I thought, well, how does that question affect me on a different level? I mean, what do I carry around, if anything, of that theme or that issue? And for me, I think that it's sort of, even on an existential level or something like that, the fact that my birth mother couldn't keep me, it has left me kind of with the assumption of eternal aloneness, in a way. I remember going to a workshop about aging, and we were asked to go through this guided imagery about ourselves in our 80s and what we would be like. And I was the only one out of about 10 people in the room who pictured myself alone. And I was the only adoptee. And I wasn't uncomfortable with that aloneness. It was me. I mean, that's part of my self-definition as alone. And I want to read the rest of what I wrote. Oh, please.
I'm fine.
You may be fine, but we're not fine if you're out of the group.
And I really feel safe back here.
No. Let me just read you the description that I then wrote up for this workshop, and then I want us to sort of decide where you want to take it from there, and either with your own ideas of what you'd like to see or just jump in with any of your own thoughts about this. Why couldn't my birth mother keep me? How do we feel at this moment about having been placed for adoption? This depends on many things, including what we know about why we were placed, how our adoptive families talked with us and allowed our feelings about it, what we told ourselves it meant that we were placed for adoption, and whether or not we have, as adults, gotten to know our birth parents and or other birth parents. Participants can explore how much our having been placed for adoption still hurts, especially if we have defined ourselves as abandoned, rejected, unlovable, unworthy, not real, etc., and might be behaving in ways that confirm our self-definitions. Help in healing can come from consciousness raising, expressing our feelings, reframing, and forgiving. Many of us get such help through mutual support, being heard, being mirrored, being accepted, finding models, and finding that we can make a difference to someone else. That was sort of my outline that I came to about how how you might be able to get from feeling rejected to feeling okay. What does anybody here want to pick up on about that? Yes.
I just want to say it's so weird. It's almost like in the sense of a confession, but when you said, well, how do you feel? And I closed my eyes and just thought, glad. And I thought, well, that's an inappropriate response. So I tried to trace back to what I felt for so long, which was abandoned. But I don't anymore, and a lot of it comes from knowing the circumstances and having met her and seeing how emotionally closed she is, and personally subscribing to the theory that one event, as traumatic as it was, doesn't change someone drastically. That basically either you were strong and you get through it, or you weren't strong and you collapse, but you couldn't be real strong and then never get it back together and collapse again. So that, I'm not all thrilled with the circumstances of how I grew up or what I lost, but overall, I don't think that the situation with her would have been that much better than what I went to. So at this point, it does feel okay.
I had a similar experience when I found my birth mother. I found that she was still in shame about having conceived me with a married man. She still felt terribly beholden to that man's wife, that she felt she needed to protect she needed to protect his wife from knowledge of my existence. And thinking about growing up in the 40s with an unmarried mother who was very ashamed made me feel it would have been wretched for both of us. Yeah.
I'd like to respond to that as a birth mother. I mean, I'm glad you both feel good at the moment about where you are, but I think from what I've seen from my Cub group in DC and from getting very involved with birth mother stuff, and also a study that was mentioned in an earlier workshop this week. There's a study by, I think it's Winkler and Van Keppel, done in 1984, and I haven't seen the study, but the presenter was saying that this study shows that for women, the single most traumatic event in their life is giving up their baby. And as I see the birth mothers I spend a lot of time with, I have never seen so many people in so much pain, and I think a lot of the birth mothers I know have had their lives crippled by this experience. Ken Watson at the beginning of the conference used the words, with women were told they could go on with their lives, and this woman came to him and said, no, my life stalled. And I think that's very true for a lot of birth mothers. So I think the women you met, while they may not have been the strongest women in the world, if they had kept you, would probably have been radically different people than the people you met.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that's difficult, though, is that intellectually, I feel like I'm a bright enough person to get it all and to understand all the reasons about it, but it doesn't change my core experience of how I feel about it. And I think what I'd be really interested in having us talk about is how, how do people grieve, and how do people then heal and move on? And I think especially growing up in an adoptive family that was not a good circumstance, and where I believe that I probably would have been better with my birth mother. And how does one eventually let go of that and leave the feeling behind at some point that that's sort of the core piece of your being, because that's got to affect everything, relationships, every part of you.
That's what I'm wondering is if it's possible to get over it. And I'm not so sure it is from either angle. And I think, again, we need to decide how we can. I would say that being part of this situation has definitely heightened my sympathy and my feelings of empathy and that kind of thing. If I can use those type of feelings to help others, that's fine, but I am not so sure that is ever going to be possible to heal that.
You're talking as a birth mother, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And as an adoptee, I'm thinking of my son too, is that feeling of abandonment it possible to heal that, or is there going to be a feeling of eternal aloneness?
I hope we can heal.
I think it's fine.
I think it can be built too.
I don't feel all that bad. I said I felt sorry, sad, those are the feelings I feel. And they will always be a part of me. I feel sorry and sad a lot of times, and they'll always be a part of me, but I don't feel badly. And I really do believe my birth mother did it in my best interest, and I love her for that. And I'm not gonna go on the rest of my life thinking, but then I'm in a situation where I had a good adopted family, but I'm not gonna go on the rest of my life feeling she was a bad woman, she just let go of me when I needed her most, because I know it was hard for her.
No, not related to your feeling for her, but I mean your feeling about yourself. Is that,
That's another, yeah, I guess I didn't see that. I don't have a high self-esteem, from what I understand, that's normal in adoptees.
You had a thought?
A lot of people don't have high self-esteem, but the adoption process seems to heighten it. And we are alone whether we like it or not. The adoption process seems to heighten it. And there is anger in us for one reason or another. There seems to be an underlying anger that the adoption process heightens. Will your son ever get through that or over that? I don't know. It's part of being alive. I've often pondered how much, would I have been the same person without the adoption process? And a lot of the tendencies in myself are there. It's just that adoption seemed to give a little extra punch to it.
I think we can forgive, but I don't think we can forgive.
Well, how much do you feel, the adoptees, do you feel that your having been placed for adoption is connected to the way you see yourself now, your self-definition?
Major league.
Major league.
I feel like I'm hiding, that she placed me so she wouldn't have to acknowledge my birth, and that I'm hiding my true identity, like I'm in the witness protection program, and my adopted parents are no longer living, and now I don't have anybody to hide behind anymore. And so now I'm on the brink of being able to contact. I know who to contact, but it's just scared me to death because I feel that the response is going to be, oh no, that baby is dead. That identity is erased. And so I still feel like I have to hide.
Well, are you hiding from what you feel you're going to get from her? Or what I thought you meant at the beginning was that you were participating in hiding yourself so that she wouldn't have to face you.
Right. So the child she gave birth to, it's just like having her, the closest she could come to an abortion.
You're not supposed to exist.
Right. I'm not supposed to exist. And
Speaking from a birth mother's point, it's so true. I had two at place for adoption, and they've existed from the day I had to let them go. And every day, and every bit of my heart. And it breaks my heart to hear you say that, because I'm thinking of this woman out there who probably loved having you in her arms, but I don't know that for a fact. But that's just how I'm feeling.
I've been scared to say till yesterday. I was afraid to even admit that to anybody, even another adoptee or adopted parent or birth. I was just scared to say it.
How was it presented to you from your adopted family? How did they tell you about being adopted, the reasons and that sort of thing?
It changed as I got older. When I was too young to understand, it was presented as this person loved you so much that she did this for you. And then as I got older, I mean, that's a sort of a scary conception of love. But as I got old enough to figure this out, that most adoptees came from so-called, from unwed mothers and pregnancies that are supposed to be hidden, And I started feeling that I was supposed to be hidden, and I didn't have anybody to talk to. And that this wonderful fairy tale they had invented, that was their thing, and that all this stuff was going on underneath inside of me, but I had nowhere to go, nobody to talk to. And so I evolved into this little thing of, okay, I'll hide behind this loving, wonderful game here, this loving adopted family. And until yesterday, I mean, really and truly, it was just so shocking to me to just come out and say this, to hear the words out of my mouth.
What do you think helped you to, what was the impetus to your saying it?
Well, this is my second go-round of this issue because it's a big thing for me, and the title is, Why Couldn't My Birth Mother Keep Me? And I got into it wanting 2 shots at understanding why couldn't she? I mean, I really want to know, tell me why. Tell me why. I've got to understand this. But it was presented as, what we talked about was what is our perception of why we were given up. So that's the focus on me, not the focus on her. I went to focus on her. And toward the end of the workshop, all of a sudden, it was just this overpowering feeling in me of, well, if we're focusing on me, then that's how I feel, and I just want to say it. It's just so overwhelming. I've never said it before. And what if I say it? What's going to happen if I say it? So
That's great.
the world didn't fall apart, and it was just really, really nice. I mean, y'all know that I'm not hiding, I'm not hiding anymore.
Here you are.
I'm hiding.
Yeah.
I'd like to pick up on sort of what you said. This is my first time at this kind of thing too. And I've just started to search, so most everybody that I've heard of these stories of their search. So I've been feeling good on one hand and then sort of angry on the other that I wish I was saying those stories. But the other thing that I found myself last night, my husband came in to share the weekend, and I found myself saying to him, gee, Dave, this is the first time I've been with that many adopted people. Look how neat they are. They're not weird. They're not whatever, because on all these other issues, I've always tried to find where I fit. Sometimes I thought I was too this way or too that way. And the same for birth mothers. That was so healing for me to be in sessions with birth mothers to find out what
A lot of times. I was angry that she wasn't part of this. I couldn't give my biological son a grandparent or history or something that he could feel. So I didn't. So it just increased the rage.
Yeah, when I had my first child, I was really angry for a while. Because of the same reasons. Because I couldn't give, everybody said, she looks like your husband, or maybe your husband's side, but we don't know what's on your side. Maybe she does look like your birth mother, who knows? And I was angry that I couldn't know that. But then I had a second child that died, and so then I understood somewhat of what my roots were had to go through.
Can I ask a couple open-ended questions to all the adoptees? The first question I'd like to ask is, in the other adoptees that you've spoken with here in Chicago, as well as in your support group, was it found to be a generally healthy adoptive relationship between you and your adopted parents? Or at some point in time did it become or counterproductive? And secondly, in deciding for those who have started your search, was there some, excuse me for my lack of right terms, but was there some significant event, either age, pending marriage, pending motherhood, that decided you to say, hey, who the hell is this person, this vehicle, who gave me life,
I was thinking also before you said it, absolutely. My husband swears, I do not remember. The first thing I said on the delivery table was, I can't believe I haven't been alone. The absolutely first thing, once that child was out, that was what I was completely coherent, was natural delivery. When I saw her, the time I spent with her.
People didn't hear what you said.
I said on the delivery table, I can't believe I have a blood relative. It was the first thing I said. When I saw her, there was a lot of anger, not towards her, but it brought it up, but it also brought up an enormous amount of healing having a daughter. It was one of the most healing things in the world that happened to me, and I was grateful that I had a girl because I knew I was rehealing myself while that happened. But yes, when I got married, I started the search and stopped. When I was pregnant, I got the search going and stopped. When I was going in for a biopsy for breast cancer at the age of 33, I went full force into the search, and I didn't let anything stop me. So that, all of that stuff.
I think in terms of, how adoptive families or relationships are, at least my theory, running a search and support group and talking to lots of people about it, is that adoptive families are like biological families. And there's going to be sexual abuse and physical abuse and emotional abuse and alcoholism and mental illness. And I think that one of the traumas about this is that they convince birth mothers that the kids are going to be placed in the best possible homes. And in fact, they're just like regular homes where all that stuff happens. And probably at about the same rate. But that there's so much denial around it. And even when people tell their stories, I think that people don't want to believe it. That's my sense.
You can't interview a family and find out if they're a good family or not.
Good point.
You know, they take a shower that day because they know the lady's coming. Well, they
Right.
never take a shower.
What are they going to say? Like, I'm a sex offender? You know, I mean,
Clean house, they're coming.
exactly.
Yeah, I'd like to go back a little bit and just reinforce this thing about giving birth as a way of getting in touch with the fact that somebody gave birth to you. I haven't given birth, but when I was in the Peace Corps in the late 60s in Africa, and somebody gave me a pregnant dog, and the dog woke me up one night and like practically dragged me into sitting on the couch in my house with her on my lap, and she gave birth 8 times on my lap. And this was one of the most wonderful things that had ever happened to me, because I didn't think I had any connection to the birth process. I mean, I don't think that I felt I had been born in a physical way. I think that I felt that I was the figment of some agency person's imagination who had then been able to provide me to this waiting family. I mean, I really had never pictured being born in a physical way. And I sort of, got to give birth with this dog in my lap. And it is what connected me to thinking somebody birthed me. And that was sort of one of the opening up points in my life that later I had enough of those opening up times that I then searched. But that was just
I wanted to avoid that issue by consciously I was the good adoptee, so I became a mother in the same way my parents became parents to me. I married someone who had children. And I'm consciously, I was so proud of myself. Here these children, they meet me, and I was just carrying on the family tradition. And then my parents went and died, and then this whole apple cart was upset, and then they aren't there anymore, so now I have a chance to go find my birth family, but oh my heavens, if I find where I came from, I have no tie to the future. So, see, then that's because I can't give birth to any children. I will never give birth to children. So I'm tied through, I have emotionally survived this trauma called adoption. I'm setting it up so that I came from a mysterious agency and to help people become a family, and then I went into another family that was already created in the generation after me, so it was a balance there. But then to have a biological family that came before me, and what am I going to do to contribute? There's no carrying on. I don't
You're
feel
still contributing to your dead children.
That's not a part, that's a disconnection from the genealogy, the genetic, biological. That's part of why I haven't taken my search either, is I'm not going to have to face that issue.
It's going to make you feel unbalanced because
Yes.
you have the tie to the past but not to the future then.
And this all just occurred to me on the way home the other day, relating to, Here's the story. I searched 9 months, well, let me tell a story from back. When I was 18, I got pregnant, and in desperation, I had an abortion. And instead of having a baby 9 months later, I found my birth mother 9 months later. And what occurred to me 2 nights ago, driving home from this conference, was I couldn't go into the future and talk on the past. And that's why I couldn't, I had the abortion because I didn't feel like I could emotionally survive the pregnancy.
The underpinnings of the
Yeah.
past to help you raise the future generation.
Yeah, and it wasn't that baby was not with me because I couldn't grasp. I still can't. My best friends, my 2 best friends have children, and I can't grasp that these children, are theirs. They're still, I can never grasp that connection. So, and I think I'm a search consultant, and a lot of my clients come to me after just having a child or pregnancy scare or just repeatedly.
We used to say at the Adoption Forum in Philadelphia that the typical person who called us and became a member was a 28-year-old woman who had either just gotten engaged, just gotten married, just pregnant, or just had a baby. And that was it. Yeah. And she called us up.
What was the age that you began looking? As, for the adoptees?
17.
21, 17?
41.
41?
30.
28?
22.
30 something.
39.
That's not when we wanted to look at Sarah, that's when we first had the courage to look.
Yeah, I know, I just...
It's also that I know on my part that when I talk to a real old friend from high school, she says it's all you ever talked about in high school. My adoptive mother says, you asked us repeatedly, you asked us when you were 16, we said come back when you were 18, you didn't come back. I have no recollection of any of that. I do not remember.
Well, how much are other people interested in talking about the healing that Mary Ellen suggested? How do we get out of it's still hurting?
Well, you mentioned earlier, you asked a question earlier about how much did adoption affect our feelings about things? And I've done extensive counseling and really am very aware of a lot of the feelings and emotional patterns that I have. I think it's a lot related to it. I agree with somebody mentioned earlier about you're not supposed to exist, and feeling not okay and thinking of all the reasons I might not feel okay, and the only reason that I really don't feel okay is because I'm alive. I wasn't supposed to be here. It's kind of the feeling that I absorbed, and a lot of things about not belonging and feeling abandoned at the least possible thing. Just a lot of emotional patterns like that, and I do believe you can heal from them. I think personally, the more information that I'm gathering about what happened to me and facing it and looking at it, because I know I'm like this really sad, abandoned little girl. And the more I can find out what really happened and gather the facts and get the support and get more of and also feel it, allow myself to grieve and cry, that it helps a lot. I know I'm feeling much stronger this year at this conference than I did last year. And so I really believe healing can take place, but those patterns are really heavy. I mean, they're really there. And
You're making me think about a time that I went to an Alma meeting in New York City, and someone I knew who had just found her birth family talked about going and meeting her siblings because her birth parents had both died, and then going home and crying for several hours. And someone asked her, were you crying because you couldn't meet your birth mother? And she said, no, I was crying for that little baby that spent a certain amount of time totally alone in between families. And that really left a lasting impression on me, and I later really sort of went through that myself because I spent the first 10 weeks of my life in the agency nursery with no one person there for me, and I really spent a lot of time thinking about how alone that was and grieving for that little baby. So that's what you just made me
And it's like at any time something doesn't work out in a relationship, it's like the intensity of the feelings are, because it's like that, that old stuff. And in fact, sometimes when I'm really get into it and I feel like I'm doomed to be alone because of what happened. And I feel like I'm, building bridges and doing better and all of that, but that's still a piece of it that isn't totally healed, that kind of colors things when I'm feeling most depressed.
Is this because we're adopted or because we're human? I bring up issues like this with other people, and they'll say, oh, everybody feels that way at some point in their life. And my adopted mother's wonderful, but she does do this a lot to me. I'll say, well, I often thought about the other parent. Well, when I was a kid, I used to say to my parents that they weren't my real parents, too. It's not the same. But I wonder sometimes, am I feeling the feelings I'm feeling? Are these just normal feelings? Do I have low self-esteem because everybody does? Or do I have low self-esteem because I'm adopted?
I think it gets really intensified. I mean, I think what you were saying before is true, that it's, as well as other things. Certainly there's a lot of factors that I think, for me, go into it, but that's a big piece of it. That was a trauma that I think for adoptees we can't deny, that we were separated from people that were supposed to keep us, And that, to me, seemed like a trauma. I don't see how it can't be a trauma.
I spent 33 years on my birthday every year being depressed, picking a fight, and it was like on my 33rd birthday where I had picked an enormous fight with my husband, who was wonderful, to the point where he finally left the house, took my daughter, and his attitude was like, screw you, honey, and left. That I finally realized on that day and finally worked it through. And I had done it for 33 years because I did not feel like I was entitled to any presents or anything. And it was a reminder of that day. You weren't worth anything. You weren't entitled to anything. And I was subconsciously or unconsciously making those events happen. And it was like 2 years ago that it finally dawned on me what I was doing. And it hit me like the roof had just caved in on me. And it was wonderful. And it was a really wonderful turning point to have that happen.
Last year, I had my first adult birthday party. I allowed it to happen. And I sent out the invitations, and it was neat. But I never would someone say, "Oh, let's go out to dinner, have a party." No, and I would plan vacations so I'd be away, or I have to work. I'd set up a workshop I'd have to do just so I couldn't have to celebrate that day. But I finally did. It's my birthday.
I want to just say two things, that they are doing research now that shows that young babies know when there is a change. And they have, I believe they have videos that show that a baby, as an infant, a child knows when he's placed with someone different, someone strange. And I think we don't know the half of what children know when they are in the womb and what they pick up. There's been studies on people who remember their birth experience. And so that there is a close bonding between the birth mother, and when you're placed with another mother, the baby knows, and I think this is part of the grieving. I do want to just say one other thing, that when I was 23, as a young school teacher, and I went to graduate school for a semester and had a lot of child development and was working on my master's in special education, teaching the culturally disadvantaged. So I had quite a bit of child psychology also. But I was told by my social worker that I would ruin my child's life. And what mother is going to do that? Those were her words, that I would ruin my child's life. And
you thought she must know what she's talking about, right?
She was the expert, you see. Even though I'd had all this child psychology, I was a teacher. I would not have lost my job, by the way. I could easily have taught school and had my child's ended, but
What year?
67.
This is the late 50s.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I wouldn't have lost. Oh.
More KP2.
But I,
It's called, no, go ahead.
yeah, I have 8 other wonderful children, and my oldest, my 9th child, was my adopted. I haven't ruined my children's lives. That was very heavy for someone trying to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
My birth mother said it would have killed her mother. That was the thing that for her made the difference.
I just say too, I went back to the agency because I'd been really severely colicky. I was placed at just about 4 months.
And, I mean, my mother and father went through, they finally were giving me pear nectar with calcium drops. I could not eat anything. I screamed day and night. I went back to the agency at one point, because I'd been back a lot, and said, do you have record of my being colicky? Because it started in 4 months. And she said, no, all the records go through, and she read through them. You were a good eater, no problems with the formula, no problems with this. And I wonder, because friends of ours have a Korean child who they got at 3 months or 4 months or 5 months, and she'd been in 3 separate homes. And she said when they first got Joanna, she would wake up from her nap and scream and close her eyes like she was trying to remember what she'd been dreaming. And it went on for like the first month or 2 that they had her. She would just cover her eyes and scream and close them when she'd wake up and realize she was in a different place again.
Those studies were at 3 weeks that I read about. So the child knew.
Or I wonder sometimes if the opposite happens. I've also heard the opposite story about like being such a good baby and being such a quiet baby, and whether or not the kid in the orphanage or wherever like ends up protesting so much and then ends up in this despair. So they're actually sort of getting a depressed baby or something that doesn't cry hardly at all.
That was me. I never, Mom said she had to check me the first night because I didn't cry. You were always happy, you never cried.
Well, so far I've heard about healing, that facing the pain and grieving the loss, which is a big theme at this conference. That's one step. What about anything else that's helped any of you?
Seeing a picture of mine, that helped tremendously. But I think the being connected to someone. Because even when I had my children, they were like, well, they were having the same reactions. I'm finally related to someone. They came out looking just like my husband, and I was crushed. I couldn't tell anybody I was crushed, but I was crushed. They looked just like, and everybody say, "Oh, doesn't have a bit of you in him." And that really hurt, but I could never. Yeah, you know, I didn't want to come across like, if I said anything, they'd think I thought my husband was ugly or crummy or something. So I didn't want to say anything, so I never could tell anybody. But I was crushed. And then I got this picture of my birth mother, and I think I kind of look like her. And that was a real wonderful feeling. And that helped a whole lot, just to be connected somewhere.
Yeah. And what I remember from the Grieving the Losses workshop yesterday was that maybe you can't grieve until you know what you lost. So this is seeing exactly who it was you lost.
Right.
Which can allow you to grieve.
I've always wondered, does having a baby help?
It helps and it hurts.
I've always expected it will.
It helps and it hurts because it hurt because I couldn't ever give up my child, I don't think, but I'm certainly not in the circumstances my birth mother was in, and it hurts thinking 2 things. First, the pain she had to go through to give up a child, because that's not an easy pain to have. And secondly, lost my train of thought. It also helps though because you are connected finally to someone.
I feel like like there's been this derailment in the genealogy, and continuing it on with this little skip is gonna, continuing it on straight is gonna help. I don't know if I'm maybe not gonna be so I'm just
birth mothers I've met, and I can only speak for myself. Someone said it's so hard to understand. They did it because they loved you so much. All I could think about when I had that little tiny baby and I looked at her and I held her was, how can I take this child home and leave her at home when I go to school and probably come home and find her beaten by my mother? How could I do that to her? And the social workers tell you over and over again, if you keep this child, you're only going to be hurting her. And they beat that into your head. And so you just think, I can't do that to her. I can't do that to her. So you don't have a choice. Anyway, that's how I felt, and that was my 2 situations. Just if it helps someone here. Whoever wants to talk.
Just hold on till somebody. baby.
Yeah.
I find the microphone gets in the way, and I find it extremely annoying.
Oh.
Yeah, can we just?
Somebody gave it to
can we
us and
just
said,
Forget about it?
His name's Joe.
Okay. Does anybody object to this?
That's fine.
I have a question. After I met my birth mother, she said to me, and when I was born, she was 24 and she was working and she was living, out on her own. She said to me, if I know what it would be like all these years, I would have kept you. And that scared the hell out of me. And it still does.
Why?
Because as misunderstood as I felt in my adoptive family, and as much as I didn't feel I belonged, she is not the healthiest, mentally the healthiest person I've met. She's very controlling, and she's very passive aggressive. And on one hand it's that, but on the other hand it's considering having a completely different identity and a completely different life. While on one hand it's really scary for me to think that I laid in that nursery for 10 days until somebody decided who I was going to be. On the other hand, it's scary to consider that I could have been somebody else, or who I really am. So does anybody else feel that way? We all seem to be sitting here saying, regretting that we were relinquished, but I think when it comes down to it, does any of us really wish we could go back into the other way?
I think it's pretty hard to think theoretically about giving up who you have become, just because you're you now, and it's hard to give up on. It makes me think of when I met the woman who almost adopted me. And the reason she didn't was that she got pregnant and she sort of passed me on to my adoptive parents. But so this would have been my mother, but for a pregnancy, an unexpected one. And it made me very possessive of my adoptive mother, who I decided I was sure glad I had, instead of this woman. Because this woman's assumption was almost that, well, I would have been your mother, and I was saying, no, I can't let go of who I have become because of my particular adoptive mother. It's different, but it's a little bit related, I think, in that it's hard to, you can't take out of us now what has happened to us, because we wouldn't be the same.
But do other adoptees feel that they really don't know who they are? Mm-hmm. We didn't have the benefit of having someone else. I change my hair about every month, it seems like, and I never liked it. And I think I'm always trying to look for me. And I change what styles I like, or this or that I like, constantly, because I'm trying to figure out what's me. Is this just a normal person, or is this an adoptee who didn't have somebody my adoptive parents were very different than their temperaments, and personalities were very different than mine. And I never felt like I could fit in that respect.
I think that if you've had people around you that are like you, you've had a chance to play around with how much you want to go along with what you have in common, and how much you want to differentiate yourself from that. And you know what people with your kind of hair do with their hair, and what works and what doesn't work, and that sort of thing. And the hair reminds me of...
it sounds stupid, but...
No. No. I just, one little hair anecdote, and that is that at a very early adoption forum meeting, there was a woman who came to talk about how she had just found her birth family. And for the first time in her life, it had given her the courage to wear her hair its natural color. And this other woman there said, that's funny, because I found my birth family and it gave me the courage to bleach my hair. But anyway, being surrounded with people that you have you're cut from the same cloth in a lot of ways, gives you a chance to really play around with that substance and what you want to do with that substance compared to what the other people are doing with it, for instance.
That's interesting because there more and more research is pointing out that genetics have much more to do with who we are than environment. I mean, how different would we be if we were raised in a different family? I'm not so sure that, you know, that we may have less opportunities, less materialistically and that kind of thing. But genetically, you know, genetics have played a big part in who we are.
But do you also know that they've done twin studies where twins who were raised apart turn out to be more alike than twins who were raised together, because the twins who were raised together had to differentiate themselves from each other, and so they played off each other to become different.
Still the genetics.
Yeah.
I wish my birth mother would know that, because she's told me, she says, I gave you genetically your health, but everything else I believe your parents gave you. She says, I'm musical as is she, and she says, well, you're musical because your parents afforded you music lessons. Well, my mom took 12 years of music lessons, piano, and she can't play Mary Had a Little Lamb on the piano. And I didn't think of that comment until later, but I wish she could know that, because I believe that too.
The twin studies are done by a man named Bouchard, Bouchard, and I think he's at the University of Minnesota.
He's on the board of directors of the AAC. Usually, yes.
So you might want to get some of his papers.
She doesn't want me writing to her.
You're not writing. Bouchard is.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. She's in denial. I think your birth mother is. She's scared or something.
She's scared to death.
Yeah.
But I don't, is it healthy to get her out of the denial?
Yes.
I think so.
But I don't see how you can.
Right.
Right, I was gonna
But
say.
see, I can't, and the thing is, her husband doesn't know, nobody in her family knows.
And she has to do it. You can't.
Well, and I don't think she ever will.
Give her time, dear, give her time. How long has it been?
Not that long.
Give her time.
Again, to get back to the question of identity, that's exactly what I'm struggling with right now, because in my adopted family, they had a birth child right after me, and we were the only two children. I was very different, and my sister, when we were told to be good and conform, she could more easily conform because she was just more naturally like them. And so I feel I would have been a different person, because I feel that the real person that I am is inside of me, but I've had to cover it up so much. And so what I know that I am is the same person I would have been wherever I would have been, but what the world knows of me is different. What the world sees of me is different.
But you seem to be in the process of deciding to let that person out.
As of yesterday.
That's great. I think that's the crux of the whole problem for adoptees. You know, we became who we are through an unnatural process. You know, and who would we have been if the normal course of nature or life had taken its course?
Except we
And
are
that's-
who we are because of what did
Right,
happen.
but that's where the healing comes in too. Allowing to experiment now, with giving permission to self to experiment, to find out, you know, do I have some natural or some genetic talents in this area? They told me I was stupid. Okay, I grew up with that, you know, the whole family was stupid, so I had to fit into that, you know, that mold. I think if I ever find out that I have their genes, I'll probably commit suicide. And there is
Were
a
you
possibility.
aware of hiding your intelligence?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Same
Who told you
here.
But is
That
is
was my
that
nickname.
is that for being adoptees, or is that for being women?
Pardon?
There's a great force in our society for women to hide their intelligence. I am not an adoptee, and at the time I was a child, I wasn't yet a birth mother, but I felt a very strong need to hide my intelligence. And I remember one of the happiest days of my life is when I failed a math test. I was so pleased with that.
I think the other interesting thing about identification for me, anyways, that I felt like I was so different from my adoptive family that and felt not connected in such a way, in a certain way, that I could sort of figure out who I was all on my own, because I knew when I looked at them that that wasn't who I wanted to be. And so there was more, I think, of more freedom in a certain way to figure out who I was. And after meeting my birth mother and having a relationship with her for a year and a half, there's definitely a lot of similarities, but there are ways that I'm very different. So I feel like having two families, but also having really not really fully fitting in either one.
I had a father who I always brought home straight A's, and the other families would be promising their kids $1 for every A that they would bring home, and my father one time promised me $1 for every B I would bring home. But I think that has to do with being female and his being nervous that if I was smart I would never get a man. And you know, I don't. But there was also nervousness about having a child smarter than he was too.
Yeah, because they didn't ever, not, very few of them completed high school.
Very few of
the family system completed
of
high
your
school.
family.
Right, and they made the males quit in 8th grade so they could work. So it was, you hid, there were consequences.
And did you go on to more school than that? You managed to break out of the
After I
family
left.
tradition.
I think for part of who you're finding you are too, I also went through extensive analysis, and there was a point that I was very fortunate. I was in a position where I didn't have to work. I worked in the bond markets. I'd made a lot of money. My husband had a good job, and I realized that every time I got a fat paycheck, I was going out and buying a fat art book, you know? And I have this art book collection that is overwhelming, and you know, it's like, so one day I had to open my eyes and like, God, what are you doing, you know? I got a bonus, I bought a drafting table. You know, I made some more money, I bought a chair. It sat there for years, but I had it. And when I finally was in therapy, and the woman who I worked with was wonderful, and I grew to love her dearly, she said, look, you're in a very good position, stay home, and just sit in the room where you feel most comfortable, and eventually you are going to get a little voice inside of you that is going to tell you to do something. Well, I got to the point where I literally had to pull the TV tube out of the television and give it to my husband to take every day to work in the car so I would not watch TV. And I would sit there, and she's like, if you want to do something, get up and do it and see how it feels for a little while, and if you want to get into it, do it, but don't move. Don't get up to clean house. Don't get up to do laundry. This is a couple hours a day for you just to sit, to let this happen.
In other words, don't distract yourself.
Yeah, it took 2 years. It took 2 years before I finally turned around and started going with it, but combined the business, went back for interior design, finished that, and then finally went back to doing what I wanted to do, which is my own artwork. And before I started searching, had gotten to the point of showing and getting into national shows and doing that kind of stuff. I was so far from that. I always said, an artist paints, and you're not painting, so you're not an artist. And it was just that cut and dry for me. But it was that time, and it took that amount of time and that amount of work for it to happen. But I believe that, like when you say, if you were raised by a different family, somewhere in you, there's you. And you know when you're doing something that you don't like or doesn't feel it, and you know when you're doing something that overdoes.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Yes.
People look at me and say, 2 years? Like they picture me, you know, like glued to this couch. That also included like staying away from the refrigerator.
When you bought the drafting table, you weren't consciously aware of thinking, I'm going to use this someday, or?
I was interested in art in high school, and everybody always said to me, you'll never get a job as an artist. Keep it as a hobby. Do something practical. So I went into teaching. You know, I thought I would go into teaching. And I had applied to one of the toughest schools in the country and didn't get in, and thought, well, if I don't have the talent to get into Cooper Union, then what am I worth? You know, so you know, there were so many other places I could have gone. What finally happened is that at one point in college, I'd been in for 2 years, and I decided I was going to switch over to visual arts. And like a couple of days before the portfolio was due for an internal transfer, we had a fire and the suite burned out and I lost the portfolio. I got into the program based on faculty that came to my aid and admitted me, and completed the college and had done that for myself. But when the college was over, it was like, it was wonderful training, but it was strictly classical training, and it did not prepare you for a job. So I then had to leave it behind again because it wasn't geared towards design or advertising. It was 6 or 8 hours a day in a painting studio, in a drawing studio, and that end of it. So yeah, I mean, you know, I could probably draw to knock your socks off, but at that point I had no way to gear it towards anything, so.
Is your
I
birth
went-
family artistic?
One of the few things my birth mother offered to me, and she was very closed down emotionally, which I found was one of the greatest gifts she could have, because I didn't ask it, she remembered it from a letter. She said, as far as the ability comes, the art ability, she said, it's natural. She said, I paint, I've always painted. I love to paint, I don't show anyone, it's something I do for myself. And I would, I'm ready to break into that house one night, to just like start chancing to see the stuff, but yeah, she does. But she also went to college for accounting and finance, which is bizarre to me because that's where I wound up when I did work.
Are you the Susan that did Susan's letter?
Yeah.
Susan Sweater?
There's I don't even know what it started out to be, but it's like a print that was sitting in the book room the other day. I don't know.
It's a color laser of a collage, and it's I haven't shown it, but I think when I start getting back, because all of the other work had been abstract, it's the first realistic work I've done in years.
Huh. Tell us about what it's about.
It's a woman sitting in a kind of basket of flowers that's very sentimental and very reflective, and the memories of going back to childhood, and it's the positive side of kids playing, and there's also the negative side, because up in the corner there's kind of there's an adoption agency or an orphanage scene, which is not realistic from the time I was adopted, but my adoptive family was not always particularly wonderful with their fantasy stories, and so it's a picture of a child standing alone left in this orphanage. There's a broken clock on it, time has stopped, and other things like that. It's very sad, but the other, it's from a series called Adopted Children Never Forget, and the other pieces in the series are just so angry that I hesitate to show them, especially in that sense, because they're scary. They were done at a very angry stage, but it's part of the myths. One of them has a little girl lying in bed, and there are like fairies dancing all around her, and the window open, and there's one with a woman standing in front of a mirror in a wedding gown, and there's a picture almost like a Cupid-like face reflecting back at her, and there's another woman standing next to her with no face that is completely dressed in black as if she's in mourning, and it's just a series of a lot of images.
Yeah. And when did you start to do those?
After I started the search, because I guess I needed some outlet for the work, and I couldn't go back to the kind of work I was doing. And then I stopped working altogether because the search was just so incredibly emotionally draining. I couldn't sustain both of them. So I'm real curious. I haven't worked in a long time to see when the work's going to look like when I start working.
So that's an example of healing too.
And the funny thing is when I've gone back to it and I've seen books that have used the terminology and reflected it, my medium was always collage, and I was always aware of the fact that it was a symbolic piecing together, and that it was, when somebody first used the word alchemy with me, it just stuck, because alchemy was a science years ago of trying to turn baser materials, mostly lead, into gold, and I was taking these scraps of paper and junk and trying to make them into something magical. And it's to the point where I see my own bias. When I see collage that's made out of beautiful paper, I don't give it a lot of credit, because to take something beautiful and make something beautiful is absolutely like no work to me. Just frame the paper, why bother to rip it up and rearrange it? So that was
great.
That was a real challenge.
Is that supposed to be a metaphor for what your sense of your own worth and what your adoptive parents did?
And my whole life of taking all of these little things and piecing them together. My adoptive mother is very, very strong, and I perceive myself as very strong. I really believe I got that strength from her, because from what I've seen of my birth mother, it's not there. So it's all of it to make something whole, to make a unit.
And you put the strong woman from your adoptive mother and the artist from your birth mother together in you. Could you talk about some of the healing you've seen in your work with adoptees? What do you think works especially for adoptees that is not necessarily as relevant to other people, to non-adoptees? Putting you on
Having
the
a
spot.
blank, right? Well, I think that what you had said before was really, I think that we, for me anyway, I need to, and for the people that I work, clients that I work with, that we really need to go through the feelings and really let ourselves feel and be healed by working through the grief and the loss and the rage and a lot of the hurt. And I'm not sure, I mean, I'm more of a traditional therapist where I do talking therapy, and the tool that I have is to talk about things. And I've done some of my own work and my own healing in a more body work to address some of the pre-verbal stuff and the stuff that happened when the trauma happened. And some of that has included things like holding for hours at a time and just sobbing, or real rage work where I have a punching bag in my house, and really working in that in a different way that doesn't use words. Because I think sometimes words, I mean, I can talk to somebody, I've been in therapy for years and it's helpful, but I can talk until I'm blue in the face and it doesn't get to the heart, it doesn't get to where where the real pain is or where the real rage is. And so I've been trying to figure out a way to, I don't work in the kind of setting where I can do that kind of work with the clients that I work with, but doing a lot more trying to get at the affect, I think, than just sort of talking about things. I ask people to do a lot of like artwork, collage work, if they're particularly feeling like self-destructive or feeling like they want to run away, adolescent adoptees or whatever, to try to find either writing, freestyle, just writing and writing, and not stopping, to rip pages out of things out of magazines, anything that they think is going on, and paste them on a piece of paper. Exercise, body work, massage, rolfing. I mean, I just think that there's so many ways that we can heal, that we need to really sometimes be professional, work almost full-time on healing.
Work
sometimes
full-time on healing ourselves.
Right. Yeah. In whatever ways we can do. Yeah.
I'm sorry I came in the middle, but I would like to share with you that I just came from the group called Adoptive Parenting, and it was a program for adoptive parents, of which I am one, but I'm also an adoptee, and I'm also a mother of 2 birth children that I have raised. I became angrier in that group than I have been the whole time. I went there hoping that maybe I could help some adoptive mothers deal with where the adoptee is coming from. And I left because the way the presenters were talking about us, it was as if everything, I got the impression that their feeling was that whatever we did as children that was abnormal or was unacceptable behavior was because we were adopted. And I really find that very hard to accept because, kids will be kids. And it isn't because of what we've gone without or what we were deprived of or our grief. All children have grief at some time for different reasons and different measures. And I just saw these women getting so wrapped up in all these special things they were going to do for these poor children, and keeping them home from school because this was their birthday, and their birthday was particularly a hard day for them to deal with. And I don't know, did the rest of you feel that way? I wanted to be treated like a normal child, or a regular child, if there is such a thing. And I'm hearing these ladies feeling like whenever their children acted beyond the norm, it was because they were adopted.
Well, we have talked a little bit about how birthdays have been difficult for some of us, but what you're saying makes me think of it discounts little kids' being upset about something that's really happening in the here and now. And
Because they're a
and-
little child.
Yeah. And because of something specific that may be happening to them that's painful and that has nothing to do with adoption. And if you're going to
Exactly.
discount it and say, oh, that's the adoption, you're denying that kid's reality in a different way. Whereas if you deny that adoption can ever be causing a problem, that's denying our reality in another way.
But I think it's been too much the other way. I think adoption has been entirely discounted as the cause of any, emotional upset or anything. So I don't think most adoptive parents feel, that the adoption had anything to do with it. They don't know enough.
I think they don't know what to think.
Well, I think that's it, and I perhaps
And I don't think
remember-
anybody does know what.
And I empathize with them, because if these are the only children they've ever raised, then they really do have a challenge there discerning what is genetic and why this behavior exists. And I guess perhaps I do have the advantage of having raised, prior to my adoptive children, having two other children. And so I can say that a child is a child. And I sort of felt like they were just picking these kids apart, looking for, well, if this behavior must be because of this.
Objectifying them rather than relating to them.
Yes, I was getting really angry, so I thought it could be doing all
Well,
of you.
welcome. Ray, what-
Ken Watson, I have to stand up to demonstrate this. Ken Watson did this either last year or in Boston, said that in terms of dealing with some of those issues, is it because it's a kid or is it because he's adopted? And he said, if you hop around like this, like it's because he's a child, or like this because he's adopted, it's kind of like you're off balance all the time. But he says if you kind of start going like this, like there's some stability to it, that you can, the more comfortable you are in dealing with kind of both camps.
Right.
It may well be because they're 3 years old or 15 years old, but it also could be because of some grief issues or loss issues. And the more comfortable you are in that in terms of bouncing from kind of one foot to the other as a parent adds some real strength and stability.
And then he said, and this is the adoption rag.
I forgot that.
Well, it sounds like they also discount that there's any role of how adoptive parents relate, that they may be having some role in why the child's doing something.
Yeah.
Well, let's go stop that session.
I mean, I kept waiting for a chance to say something, and it was just sort of like this momentum was building. And then some people started asking questions. Well, do you think it's because of this, or could it be because of that? And it was all related to, well, you've got your hands full because he's adopted. And I mean, kids are kids, and sure, we have our special problems related to adoption, but every child has his special
But we're not
problems.
just adopted kids.
That's right. We're individuals, and we're human beings, and we're not to be analyzed like that.
But yeah, I think what you said too, when you see on the other hand, when it's not talked about at all or not acknowledged at all, and then part of at least my work in working with adoptive families is to do more of that educating and help people think about those issues. So it does feel like a balance,
I grew up in an age where whenever there were troubles in families, people would say, well, that's because she had an adopted child, and that's why they had trouble with this child. And so one of the reasons I wanted to adopt was to prove to myself that just because you're adopted doesn't mean you're a bad kid or you don't turn out decently. And
If you turned out decently, it was our influence. If you turned out poorly, it was because you didn't have their genes.
Yeah. That's
Well, there are 3 of us here who are adoptees and adopted parents, if not more. 4 of us. And have you proved what you set out to prove?
Yes. The two sons and 2 adopted daughters, and we have a wonderful relationship, and it was every bit as challenging to raise all 4 of them, and they each had their own special little problems and
And you
big
let them
problems.
each be a separate person.
That's right. I do understand that because I was adopted, I had a special understanding of my daughter's needs from time to time that an adoptee or an adoptive parent perhaps would not be as sensitive to. But anyway, I had hoped to be able to sit through it long enough to say, hey, this isn't all right.
Well, we're glad to have you. Well, what have you found as an adoptive parent then?
I'm closer to my adopted son than I am to my biological son.
That's because he's not adopted.
That's 'cause he's strange. I mean, he's really strange. I think I gave my adopted son probably more leeway, you know, in expressing himself, you know, in maybe letting things slide because, you know, this isn't the way I do it, but, you know, this is the way he seems to be doing it naturally, so I'm not going to correct it. With my biological son, maybe it was, you know, he should know better, and this is the way we're going to do it sometimes. It worked out well. The biggest problem with having him was he came out when he was 18 and told the family that he was gay. And most of the family's reaction was, thank God he doesn't have our genes. And it was like a replay of my adoptive parents because I was such a troublemaker and always was, you know, causing some embarrassment to the family, and it was always an easy out. Well, she's not ours, you know. So it was just a generation. It was a, you know, a few generations later. This was
Same
just
issues.
Same issues, you know. And they didn't see that he was a beautiful person. Just that he was. Luckily, he wasn't part of us.
We don't have to worry that it's an inherited trait that will last through the generations.
That's what his brother tells everybody. My biological son will not talk to his adopted brother. You know. And luckily, they weren't birth brothers, so he doesn't have to worry about this thing being something he can catch, or, you know, because it's genetic. He probably won't develop this. Little does he know. Anyway. So, it's interesting. I'm glad I adopted.
There's an interesting thing going on in my family now. My older daughter recently contacted and had a reunion with her birth family, which includes several siblings or half-siblings, and her brothers, which are my natural-born sons, are jealous. They're afraid that she's not going to be able to extend her love and care to include them any longer. They feel real threatened.
They feel that she's run off to her other family.
They're afraid they're going to lose her. Fortunately, they're on the other side of the country, but nonetheless, they really weren't in favor of her going to meet them.
Even with your influence?
How about any more self-definition that you feel that you have as a result of having been placed for adoption?
That a lot of people don't have identity problems who are adopted because they were so weird and did not fit in that they very early on developed their own sense of themselves because the fit was so bad.
Well, that's sort of what Mary Ellen was saying.
And I listen to it and I try and understand it, and I have such a hard time. I was glad that I was adopted because I looked at them and said, I don't want to be like them anyway. I guess I need to talk to some more people to try and understand that better because it's still, it just happened so long ago that there was me and there are other people in the world and I happened to be adopted. Period. There's me. And that core has always been there.
But do you think that having been placed for adoption, having your birth mother make either a decision or a forced decision or something like that, that she was not going to raise you, do you think that affects your self-definition at all?
I don't think so. The reason I came to the workshop looking at the title, Why Couldn't My Mother Keep Me? I looked at it in terms of why didn't she keep me? And a lot of her decision had to do with fitting into the society around her and her fears of what would happen to me. I guess I feel better in some respects because society today is different than 1946. And I don't see that tremendous pressure being put on women to give up their children. That makes me feel a little bit better. That is what I wanted to see if that thing would come up. I get the feeling as I'm listening that a lot of times we do view this as a very individual kind of decisions, but these decisions are made in the context, like you say, forced or not, of the group in which we're in. Why is it the group, even today, has so much trouble dealing with women who have children who aren't in the appropriate social role to have them? You know, I can't see where a woman who gets pregnant at 15 or 25 is necessarily evil, that she should be branded or that her children should be branded. A mistake, perhaps, depending on the circumstances, but not evil, not the condemnation that my mother had to deal with in making that decision concerning me. Now, I have no idea if I'm answering your question, but that's one of the reasons I came to the workshop, was to see if that issue would be dealt with.
The social.
Yes. The context in which the decision had to be made.
Right. Well, in some way, I think that we all have sort of a two-level response to why we were placed for adoption. One is the adult intellectual side of us that knows about societal pressure, and the other side is the little baby or the little girl or the little boy who had all kinds of irrational reactions, and it wasn't so much what really happened or what we were even really told happened, but what we did with it inside us. You know, and that's what we have to work on in ourselves. We can't change what really did happen, but we can change some of what we did with how we took it in.
It does, it gets translated into changing the group as well, though. I understand they're working on the irrational, but what about working?
You mean
in the
changing
here and now?
society?
Yeah.
It's changed. Yeah. It's changed a lot.
It has changed. Yes, it is changing, but I'm wondering if we still have, if today there are women who are still forced by pressure.
You bet there are. My Cub group is dealing with a woman, and it's less, there's a woman who may have given birth while I was here, who is in her 30s, who could afford to bring up this. I mean, it would be hard.
Sure.
But part of what is motivating her is the shame of it all. And her mother wants her to keep the child, and wants to help her keep the child. Her mother's very ill, her father is dying, and she doesn't feel she can tell her dying father what's going on. And has stayed away from him because, God forbid, she should come home. And there are those pressures. They're much less, but they're still out there, and I think it's wonderful that you're sensitive to it, because I think we all need to be fighting more for the changes you're talking about, and support for women who find themselves in a difficult place to raise a child, but who want to raise a child. And I'd like to see that be one of our real goals.
There's a maternity home behind where we meet, believe it or not, in our group. And the maternity home supposedly is for unwed mothers. but they will only take in unwed mothers that plan to relinquish the children. If you're pregnant and 16 and just need help and need money, they won't help you.
That's right. Same in Kansas City area. I did volunteer work for Birthright until I couldn't stand it any longer because the only options we gave these girls were either adoption. We didn't believe in abortion, and I don't either, but, and if they were going to keep their babies, we didn't help them in any way to do that. We couldn't. There were no resources, no financial resources, and it made me so angry that I quit working there, which I should go back because, you know, so I can change things, but it was frustrating because that's why I say changing and not changed. Because there are still, and we have many homes, unwed homes for unwed mothers in the Kansas City area. They will not accept those girls unless they're going to place. And some of them even specify what religion to place in, what kind of people, you know, I mean, it's very uncomfortable.
So partly women who are pregnant and not sure they can raise their babies, but want to get it from society that doesn't help financially.
Right.
And I would say that a lot of, especially teenagers now, get it from their parents that they better abort. And from grandparents who are afraid that they're going to get stuck raising the child.
I work with moms with pregnant women who are going to abort because they won't deal with placing their children in the adoptive system. They just will not, they'd rather have them dead than to deal with going through the same types of problems and issues that they dealt with. You know, that's pretty hard to counsel.
Can't you offer open adoption?
They don't believe in open adoption. The mothers.
Well, I mean, you have to educate.
It's adoption.
Yes,
It's adoption.
Educating,
We try.
opening up the vision.
Coming from my perspective, you know, even I say, well, it's changed today, but to try to convince some people that haven't gone through
That's
the
our
whole
job.
process.
That's our job.
You're speaking about educating people about the possibility of open adoption.
Yes, the girls who are pregnant and are faced with this, have an abortion, or give a child up for adoption, I'd say have an abortion, I really would, rather than go, I'm a birth mother, and rather than go through that, and what it did to my life, I think it would have been much healthier if I'd had an abortion, which I didn't even know the word. You know, that was
That's a
55
grief
years
you can
ago.
never get over.
Pardon?
That's right. I said, that's a grief you can never get over.
You can never be
The
reunited.
relinquishing of the child.
For an abortion.
The abortion I could have gotten over, I think, well, anyhow, but I wish that this alternative had been offered. I don't know what I would have chosen, no?
If I had been a birth mother and known the possibility of doing a search, that there was any possibility, I chose abortion over placing my child in adoption, okay, many, many years ago.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I can't go search for that child. It's gone, it's
Yes.
dead.
Yes.
I know it's dead,
Uh-huh.
you
Yes.
know, and I never will get over that grief.
Well, that's the same thing I feel, of not ever resolving my problems so that I could give birth. Because I still have those children out there somewhere, even though they're imaginary, they're still real to me. That I never resolved my adoption when I was in my years when I could have created.
You really,
Go find your mother before she stops being real.
Well, I think she died 10 years ago.
You better find that out.
you deserve to get pictures of her.
Adoption in high schools in New York, where I'm from, is a 4-letter word. I mean, there are teachers I've stayed in touch with and guidance counselors, and when girls in that high school, and I know in the area get pregnant, there is no way they will surrender those kids. I mean, it's like the worst possible thing. It's become a stigma to the other end for them.
What do they do with them?
They're keeping them at 15 and 16, and some of the circumstances are pretty rough under which they're keeping them.
I did public education in high schools in San Antonio, and there were some girls there that had chosen adoption, and they were ridiculed by their peers because the girls who were 18 and had their babies, oh, that's great, how many you have babies.
And what was the peers' perspective of abortion?
That was okay too.
It was okay too.
That was okay too, but giving away your child and this is also a highly Hispanic community, Hispanic culture.
say
nearly
give
as much.
away?
Well, I'm
Surrender.
surrender their children, relinquish their children as much as any other cultures do that. I mean, they were just really ostracized.
Cared about me and had gone through effort to make sure I was going to get a family because she believed that I should have a mother and a father. So I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't have any connection to like feeling left on a park bench or anything like that. I didn't feel rejected by her. But just the circumstances of being left in a nursery for 10 weeks where I didn't have either mother, I think has affected me in the sense that my sort of basic mode of being is more alone than most people's. And healing. I know that it was very healing for me to meet my birth mother. Somebody just recently who had no connection to adoption said, well, what did that do for you? You know? And I said, it felt like it put ground under my feet. Like I was connected to the human race in a new way. I mean, it sounds melodramatic, but it really was a very big thing that I don't think that people who are not adopted can appreciate, sort of the dimension or the gap that is closed by this piece of my own reality that I hadn't had before. So the search is one of the most major things that an adoptee can do as a healing thing. And a lot of therapy and being in touch, this is the same old thing, being in touch with feelings about it and letting myself go to having those feelings instead of defending against them makes me much more likely to be in connection with other people and not just alone in my system of holding back my feelings.
Do you have to, again, either in the people that you've counseled or in the support groups that you've been with, is that feeling of well-being or in the gap being closed and ground under your feet, is that relied upon with a happy or a positive reunion, or just the fact that you've got some knowledge to see what the person looks like? You know, I mean, you know, either because you don't want to maintain the reunion, or she may not maintain the reunion. Are there different levels of that? I mean, does there have to be an ongoing relationship for the healing to start to take place?
No,
Just
I
the
don't
fact that
think
you have a
so.
little more information on genetics and on background
I think
and
any
culture.
amount of connecting to one's reality is that much closer to healing and a step farther along in healing. Having a picture was real important to me. I mean, I thought that if my birth parents had died, I still would not stop until I had photographs of their faces because I had to see those faces. I had to. I just couldn't imagine dying without having seen my birth parents' faces. And my reunion, I would say, was not the most ecstatic one I've ever heard of, but it was fine. And I saw my birth mother once or twice a year. We lived very far apart, and I would go and visit her, and she was like having a wonderful new relative that we were very amused by each other, by our differences, by our connectedness, you know. And yet we didn't share, on some emotional levels, we just didn't connect terribly well, but there were times in my life when I was going through a crisis and she would call me every Saturday afternoon, and she really reached out to me in some ways. So that was just a piece of my reality that I was connected up to. And am I answering your question?
Yeah, I think so.
There's such a wide range of connectedness that we can make with a new person. a birth relative or not. But the choice to have it there to connect with if you choose to.
Right, right.
And I would like to underline what Mary Ellen said about body work, that because I was real disconnected from my body, and sitting in the airport after meeting my birth mother, flying home to Philadelphia, I was so aware of having this body that, like, where had it been all these years? Here it was, you know? I mean, it sounds real strange, but I was connected to my body so much more as a result of meeting this woman whose body I had come out of. And I just thought it was the most amazing thing in the world to be sitting in the same room with the body that I had come out of. I mean, not that she was just a body for me, but wow, what a physical thing, you know. It was just, before that I was much more an abstraction to myself, and after I was much more a physical being, as bizarre as that sounds.
Sort of like, so this is where I came from.
Yeah. Yeah, this is what it's like to have a biological mother, is that you can even sit in the same room and talk to. And
It wasn't an egg.
I am not a figment of somebody's imagination. I'm not an abstract construct or something. Something like that.
I never met my mother, but I met my mother's other daughters 3 weeks ago. And that was a real interesting experience for me to meet someone from my maternal side of the family. And for the first time in my life, I could ask somebody who'd known my mother questions that I needed answered. And they weren't anything really earth-shaking. It was, you know, what kind of a person was she? I remember asking, was she happy? You know, did she have any hobbies? Did she have any interests? And just looking at them physically. I remember looking at the one first who was 5'8" and thinking, that's my sister? And discovering that I had the Watkinson nose. You know, I didn't realize I never liked my nose, but I didn't realize it was because it was the Watkinson nose.
I got a reason, sure.
Right. The other sister didn't have the Watkinson nose. And it's funny, the little things that suddenly take on a different meaning to you.
I know my birth father. I didn't get to know my birth father because he died, but I know his son. He's going to be at the banquet tonight, my half-brother. And I was with him just a few weeks ago, and I said, when you look at me, do you see our father? And he said, oh, yes. He's from Arkansas. Oh, yes. And so I'm walking around for him, sort of embodying our father, which is an incredible experience to me.
I used to have people say to me in a little town that I moved back to, you must be an Olmsted. And I'd heard only bad things about the Olmsteds, which was my paternal
I don't think the
side.
people over here can hear you.
I moved back to this little town, ironically, that I was born in when I was about 22 years old. And I'd only heard these real sinister stories about my background, so people would come up to me and kind of give me the once-over and say, are you an Olmsted? And, you know, I'd been taught that the Olmsteds were like, you don't talk about the Olmsteds.
Like what?
You don't talk about the Olmsteds. You know, that was a real bad name. So anyway, finally I just did get so curious that when the man came to fix my washing machine and he said, are you an Olmsted? Well, now I had somebody trapped in my house. And so I really quizzed him and he quizzed me, and it turned out he had gone to school with my birth father, who had died. But it satisfied a little bit of my curiosity, and yet to be told you look like a father you couldn't remember, because I was 6 when I was adopted, was a really weird thing. And then I got up my courage and called my paternal grandfather, and I took a lot of courage, because after what I'd been raised to believe, I thought that I had been the black sheep of the family. And Anyway, we established a wonderful relationship for years until he died, but it's real mysterious when you don't have anybody tangible to relate to on a physical basis. And even siblings do help if there isn't a parent. It's nice to compare.
Right. Yes.
Feeling there's something interesting happening. I'm an adoptee in Serbia.
What?
My adopted parents were both 41 when they decided to adopt me. I think my father wanted a male heir. My adopted mother really didn't want me, I'm sure of, because she was becoming more and more of a child that needed to be, her needs needed to be served. So that she was really never a mother to me. She never bathed me, she never took care of me, she never fed me, she never took me anywhere. People served her needs. But she was a very big presence to me and my family. My birth mother was a very abstract concept. You know, I knew I'd been adopted. And after the death of both of my adopted parents, and they lived quite long lives. My adopted mother was 81 and 75 when she died, and my adopted father was 89 in 1982 when he died. I started, first of all, working on the history of that family, and then started my search. And little things that I have learned about my real mother, my birth mother, have come out, and the significance of them has come out, especially the fact that she twice tried to see me. She sought me out. So she's becoming real to me. And this adoptive mother is fading farther behind this, veil, or, just as a person I knew.
Right.
And I've become aware of that over this weekend, how the shift in focus, the one is coming sharply into focus, the other one is becoming more blurred and more out of focus. And she'll always be there as a person that figured in my early life, but not as, quote, mother.
Right. She didn't act like a mother.
She didn't act like a mother. And I can say that now, not with rancor or blame, because I understand Anna really pretty well. But this other person is, I find little things out, significant, or as things I knew, but suddenly I realized, one of the stories that was told in the family is that when she relinquished me, she was seen sobbing down the corridor of the courthouse. And I always heard that, but suddenly it dawned on me, my God, that woman was torn apart giving me up. I'd always known that, but the emotional significance of it.
You hadn't
never
felt it.
Hadn't felt it. It's like something I knew in my head. And I was just wiped out when I realized that here was this, not like Anna, who couldn't have cared less whether I was there. This woman was really torn apart to give me up, to relinquish me. So I wonder if other people have felt that change of focus or perspective in their lives. I'm speaking metaphorically, but that's exactly the way it feels to me.
Maybe not in the same way, because maybe we didn't have adoptive mothers quite like
And as
Anna.
distant as that.
Yeah. Anyone connect with that?
I just say that in terms of the focus, and also that the information comes to you, it's clearer also that when you're dealing with a third party, my mother's sister, you've also got to be able to take the information that you get and not hold it as gospel, because, that stuff is important. My mother's sister always described my mother as, when I spoke to her, as the oddball. And I kept thinking, great, what am I going to find? She was real strange, she was the oddball. When pushed and pushed and pushed, her definition of the oddball was when everybody else was out playing, she was reading. She went to college,
So
nobody
odd.
else did. So here I'm expecting, this woman with, playing not the full deck, and this was a difference by somebody else's definitions.
Joe says we have to stop now.
I apologize, but this room is where our reception is, and they have to clean all the chairs out of here, move in the piano, the board's going to have a rehearsal, all at 4 o'clock. But you guys can continue your discussion in one of the next rooms, if those of you want to continue.
The board going to
Sorry.
have a rehearsal.
I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I'm stopping you. That was fine.
Oh, okay.
Each of her first.